Richard D. Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. His educational background includes a BA in History from Harvard College, a MA in Economics from Stanford University, a MA in History as well as a PhD in Economics from Yale. He is a co-founder and contributor of Democracy at Work, a nonprofit organization that promotes democratic workplaces as a key part of a transition to a better economic system. The New York Times Magazine has named him America's most prominent Marxist economist.
Yes, this is a good question, and it's very, very old, in Christian theology, and also in the theological debates and history of other religions, but it's particularly true in Christianity. If you go back, you can read in the Bible about something called Jubilee. The idea, at least in the English word, is Jubilee. And what Jubilee was way back, thousands of years ago, and something which the early Christians endorsed, they supported Jubilee, they believed in it, was the idea that debts, borrowing, should periodically be erased. That if you didn't do that, the creditor would become too powerful and the debtor would become too dependent, and this would tear society apart by creating too big a difference among the members of a community, so that if you didn't have Jubilee, you would destroy the community. And therefore, periodically, all debts would be canceled. It went together with, by the way, the idea that land should never be privately owned by a few people. That land is different. In one piece of land is fertile, the next one isn't. One piece of land gets good rain, the next one doesn't. So if the piece you have for 10 years or 20 years isn't good, don't worry, because within 10 years or 20 years, we will redivide the land. That's what Jubilee meant with the land. And that way we make it fair. We don't condemn future generations who have no blame for the fact that their grandfather got the wrong piece of land at some earlier point. And the notion of fairness and justice meant Jubilee. Well, the problem with that is it's not consistent with the desires of the creditor. The creditor who makes loans wants to become wealthier by making the loans. He doesn't want his effort for 20 years or for 10 years to be undone by Jubilee. So debts were an issue that was fought out over 1,000 years, how to handle that. As late as the 12th, 13th, 14th century, if you go back and you read Thomas Aquinas or Augustine, you will learn that the Roman Catholic Church opposed usury. What that meant was the church said borrowing money at interest is a sin against Jesus Christ. It is the opposite of what a good Christian should do. Because if a person needs a loan, then a good Christian helps that person as an act of Christian solidarity. To take advantage of another person's need by charging interest was discussed by the church as an anti-Christian act. And so it was outlawed. People were punished if they did it. So you can see how far we've had to come to make debt and borrowing not only legitimate, but an enormous industry that everybody engages in, even if they go to a church on Sunday or a temple on Saturday or a mosque on Friday, where the leader of the religion says this is no good, it makes no difference. Debt became part of how capitalism in particular, even though it's older than capitalism. So you had debts in slavery, you had debts in feudalism, but particularly in capitalism, it becomes a universal kind of transaction. Right? So that's the first thing. Number two, there's no limit to who can borrow and who can lend. In the beginning, lending was done by a money lender to a capitalist in the beginning of capitalism, so that the borrower was a business and the seller was a business. But it very quickly became clear that you could lend money to a government, you could lend money to a pre-capitalist enterprise, such as a slave owner, such as a feudal lord. And then eventually, in modern capitalism, it became clear that you could also lend to the working class. In fact, in the last 40 years, lending to the working class has been the most profitable new way to make money for lenders. Before, they could not justify it because the working class had no security to give. You didn't lend money to the working class because it was too risky for a lender to do. But we have developed new techniques, for example, to sell a home to a worker and then give them a loan with the security of the home. So if they don't pay back the loan, the bank takes the home. Number one. Number two, to charge unbelievable interest rates. Credit cards, because there's no security, charge very high interest rates. In other words, the lenders have been creative in finding all kinds of new public borrowers, working class borrowers, so that, for example, in the United States today, everything is handled by debt. If I walk down the streets of New York and I'm thirsty and I stop and want to have a little bottle of water, I walk into a store, I get a bottle of water, and I hand them a credit card, which is a way of making a loan. Literally, my bank makes a loan to me of $1 and immediately gives it to the store owner from whom I get the bottle. So literally everything. And in the United States, one more thing. We are now the first generation of imposing on working class families the need to borrow money to send their young children to college. You cannot get a degree in this country, for most people, without borrowing tens of thousands of dollars. So that we now have a society in which the mass of people have to borrow to have a home, mortgage, have to borrow to have a car, automobile loans, have to borrow for daily expenses, credit card, and have to borrow for putting their children to college, to a university system. So everything is now completely locked into a total system of debt. It is a way of controlling people. It is a way of pretending that we have an adequate standard of living because we don't face the fact, for example, here in the United States, and you have similar in Europe, that for the last 30 to 40 years, the working class wages have gone nowhere. If you adjust the wages for prices, what we call the real wage, it is stagnant in the United States since the 1970s. But the standard of living of Americans has risen. How? Why? Debt. They were able to buy more things because they borrowed more money. In 2008, this collapsed, and there is no way out. That's why the crisis of 2008 is with us, because no one is going to pay workers more money. They don't have to, they won't. And no one is now going to lend them anymore because they can't pay it back. So we have reached a kind of economic dead end because the debt which kept us going for the last 30 to 40 years is not available anymore. And it means capitalism as a system doesn't know how to move the next step, which is why you have Brexit, why you have Trump, why you have Le Pen, why you have the party in Germany, etc. You have this dissolving of the institutions because the capitalism at the base used a debt which it now can't handle. Well, they get two things. You're absolutely right. They don't want it paid back. What they want is a secure, steady stream of interest payments. That because if you pay them back, they now have a problem because they're money lenders. They have to go find somebody else to lend it to. They much rather not have this problem, much more profitable for them if you just pay forever. So they make it as easy as possible for you to make small payments forever, because if you add up your whole lifetime, you make those little small payments forever, you end up giving them much more money than if you paid it back earlier. So it's the better way for them, and that's why they push it. Absolutely, that's the logic. But by the way, this isn't so new. Here in the United States, for example, it used to be the normal behavior of mining companies. That is, companies that send men down into the earth to get the coal or the iron or the gold or whatever it is. Because this work was so dangerous and this work was so badly paid that the miners, if they could get any money at all, would leave and do something else, become a farmer, go to the city, leave, because horrible work. So what they did was they said to them, whenever you can't buy food because we don't pay you wages, we will give you a loan. We will allow you to go to the store, which was maintained by the mining company. They would run the stores, and you didn't have to pay. You could get your food, your bread, your beer, your whatever you got, and you would have a debt. But then they said, if you leave here, if you don't go to work every day, we will immediately demand that you pay us, which you can't do because you don't have the money, and then we'll throw you in jail. So in other words, it was a way to force workers to continue working because they had accumulated a debt they could not pay back. And so you basically could say to them, either you work for me or we imprison you, which was illegal to do directly, but in this way it could be done. And that's now, the banks have discovered they can do that to an entire population by giving you a credit card, allowing you to build up the balance on your credit card. You cannot afford to quit your job. You cannot afford any interruption in the role that the system wants you to play, because then you risk getting into a bankruptcy situation. And that's why the laws of bankruptcy are becoming harder and harder. Here in the United States, for example, they've made it more difficult to declare bankruptcy. They've given more penalties. And the most interesting thing, the newest form of debt in the United States, which is borrowing to get a college degree, the law was created in the United States that did not allow students to declare bankruptcy on their student debt. They cannot do it. You can declare bankruptcy on your credit card debt, on your home debt, on your car debt, but you cannot, you have no bankruptcy protection for your student debt, which means that the young student population is the most hobbled by debt of anyone in the society.